Two friends, Alan Dale and Jerry Carew, who grew up just a few streets apart in St. John's East End, have been separated by Canada's geography for 3 decades. They came together virtually during the pandemic to chat about like-minded interests. Alan lives in PEI and Jerry in Newfoundland. Thriving in remoteness has been a common theme for both of them during the pandemic. Gale Force Wins, the podcast is the result.
And welcome to another edition of Gale Force Wins. We're pretty excited here today. My name is Alan Dale. With me as always is my good buddy from the east end of St. John's, where we are located right now, actually in my sister's living room in the Battery with motor vessel Asterix directly behind me. Good buddy Jerry Carew here with me today. How are you, Jerry?
Well, I'm fantastic. I've been in this house before, and it's just a pleasure to be here. 100%. When you say we're in the East End, we're almost as east as you can go, right? It's not much further.
100%, Jerry. We are pretty much as far east as you can go where we are right now. And for many people that don't know St. John's, these are the houses that are peppered on the rocks as you come in through the Narrows to enter into St. John's. So it's a pretty historic little place that we are right now. And what's even cooler about this is our next guest. His dad grew up just across the street from my sister's house here, so there's a real little neat connection. We're certainly excited to have Bill Malone on the conversation with us today. Bill's had an interesting journey, and I can't wait to dive into it. So, Bill, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Well, thanks, guys. It's a pleasure to be here, and I mean, you could not get a better view from where we're sitting right now. Yeah. So, for me, I was born in Buchans, a little mining town in central Newfoundland. That's where my mom and dad met. My dad was playing senior hockey for the Buchans Miners at the time. My mom was a nurse at the hospital there. And not long after they met and got married, I came into the world, and from there my dad had an opportunity to go to Toronto. Like most Newfoundlanders, we eventually make our way to Toronto and then boomerang back to the province. So I came back to Newfoundland, lived in the East End for a short period of time at Hillview Terrace Apartments. And then when I was about 4 or 5 years old, my mom and dad decided, hey, let's move to Mount Pearl. So Mount Pearl is essentially where I grew up, went to school.
We won't hold that against you.
That's okay.
For anyone who doesn't know, there's always been a little bit of rivalry between St. John's and Mount Pearl, hey, Bill?
Well, yeah, absolutely. And it's funny because, when you and I were talking, Jerry, about back when we were younger playing hockey and stuff, there's no doubt that our paths crossed on the ice somewhere.
Yeah.
So... But back in that time, there was a denominational school system because you had the Roman Catholic system and the Avalon Consolidated School Board. So as I was growing up in Mount Pearl, of course I was raised Roman Catholic, but the nearest Roman Catholic school was planes, trains, and automobiles away for me to get to school. So all my friends on the street were all going to Morris Academy in Mount Pearl, and I thought, well, why can't I go to school there?
Yeah.
So I had a bit of an inside track that my mom's sister, her kids, my cousins were going to that school, so she talked to the principal there, Mr. Ryan at the time, and said, can you let Bill go to school here? So sure enough, I ended up in the Avalon Consolidated School Board system going to at Morris Academy and then on to Mount Pearl Central High. So the guys used to tease me. They said I was like a confidential informant, Catholic, inside the Protestant school system. So I used to get teased about that quite a bit. But yeah, I grew up in Mount Pearl, played a lot of sports there when I was growing up.
Right.
And then when I finished high school, I got a hockey scholarship to go to St. Francis Xavier in Nova Scotia.
So that right there tells me if we crossed paths, you were probably way up the ice and I was way behind. And sorry for interrupting you.
So I went off to St. FX and got my business degree there and thought, okay, what are you going to do now? So I thought, do I want to be a lawyer? Do I want to be a stockbroker, financial advisor, that sort of thing? So I decided to go down the financial planner path. And did that for about a year and thought to myself, I'm going to starve if I continue doing this because I'm not very good at it. And learned a lot.
Yeah.
So what I decided to do was to apply for the RCMP. And there was a bit of a story behind that as well, because as my dad played senior hockey here for St. John's and so forth, he had a lot of teammates that were RCMP officers. So we had that influence in our home at different times. Guys like George Spracklin would come in, and there was one gentleman, I believe his name was Dave Shear. Anyway, these guys were, I looked up to these guys. I was only a little kid at the time. And then John Brocklehurst, who used to be at the airport, John used to ask me every time I'd come home from school, so have you got your application to the force in yet? And I was like, John, leave me alone, right? Like, no, I don't. And so, anyway, he got me thinking about it. And I decided, you know what, I'm going to give it a whirl. But I didn't tell my parents.
Yeah.
So, which led to an interesting conversation with my mother one day when the RCMP recruiting office, she didn't know they were recruiting at the time, called the house and said, yes, this is Corporal Tom Bennett of the RCMP, and I'd like to speak to Bill Malone, please. And my mother was mortified, right? Because she didn't know. She didn't know, and she thought, first of all, what did you do? Right?
Yeah,
like most mothers would, right? And for her, it was like they never had any troubles with me growing up, and so I pull into the house after working all day, and as I pull in, my mom, who was such a wonderful, wonderful lady, kind, gentle, she's standing on the front doorstep. And she's scouring, like she's ready to go. She's just ready to, rip me a new one, right?
Yeah.
And I get out of the car, and she looks at me and she says, "I got a call from the RCMP today." Oh, okay. She said they want to talk to you. I said, "Okay, thanks." And I walked past her and walked in the house, and she's like, "No, that's not good enough."
No.
Right? So, spun around, came in behind me. She says, "Why are the RCMP calling you?"
Yeah.
And I said, I applied to join the RCMP. And my mom was a nurse, right? So she's familiar with the first responder community.
Yeah, sure.
So Mom looked at me and she says, "Why would you do that?" And I thought, well, it's something I want to do. But you just got a business degree. Why would you want to be a policeman?
Right.
So anyway, I explained it to her, how it's, looks like a challenging, rewarding job and all those sorts of things. And initially she was a little bit taken aback, but she was my most ardent supporter after that. And oddly enough, later in my RCMP career, when I was working in New Brunswick, she would watch the news, of course, and she'd see all these, the fishing disputes and all that stuff, and people throwing rocks at the police and stuff like that. And I'd talk to her on the phone, and she'd say, "Are you involved in that?" And I said, "Maybe." She said, "Well, I hope you're standing at the back."
Yeah.
So it's I joined the RCMP back in 1988, and they asked me if I wanted to learn French. So I said, "Well, what does that entail?" And they said, "Well, you got to take an aptitude test to see if you're capable of learning the second language, and then we're going to send you to Montreal. You live with a French family, and we're going to pay you to learn French." I said, "Sign me up." So went and did the aptitude test in Halifax. They said, "Yeah, you can learn the second language." So off I went in October of 1988 to Montreal, and spent 8 months there, and left there functionally bilingual.
Wow.
And went to Depot in Regina and did my police training out there. And when they, the most tense time for most recruits is finding out where they're going, right? Because they know that there's some good places to go,
Right, yeah.
and some bad places to go. And one of our troop counselors said to us, he says, "Boys, if you're going to a place that starts with fort or ends with lake,
Yeah.
you're in trouble."
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
So to me that, working in some of those communities was very
Yeah,
challenging
sure.
and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So I was fortunate enough that I ended up in northern New Brunswick, in Tracadie, Shiloh, New Brunswick, up in the Acadian Peninsula.
Right.
So now, when I got there, of course, the French I learned in Montreal, the instructors were, Parisian and that.
Quebecois, yeah.
Yeah, and the French they spoke on the Acadian Peninsula didn't even resemble what I had learned. So that in and of itself was a steep learning curve, but I thoroughly enjoyed my time there. The people were fantastic, treated me well, and if you made the effort, they were more than willing to help out. So I spent some time in New Brunswick. And then after, this time of year, we the anniversaries of 9/11 always
Yeah.
come up, right?
Right.
So on September 11th, 2001, I happened to be in northern New Brunswick. We were dealing with the Burnt Church fishing dispute at the
Yeah.
time. And I remember getting up to go on shift and watching the television, and I thought it was a trailer for a movie or something, right?
Yeah.
To see those planes crash into the World Trade Center. And little did I know at that time how much that would change my career and my
Right.
trajectory in my career.
Wow.
So it wasn't long after that I got seconded to go to Ottawa, and we started up a terrorist financing investigative unit up there, which was the first time it had ever been developed, and from there worked in national security and different things, and then ultimately ended up 10 years later in Afghanistan for a year as part of the Canadian Police Training Mission.
Wow. What a journey, right? From your mother scowling at you from the step. Now here you are on the cusp of going into, I guess it was Kabul, eh?
Mm-hmm.
So tell me about that. Tell me about, ramping up to go in there. What was going through your mind? The world was pretty, when was that, 2006 around there?
No, it was 2011 that we went in there.
The world was a bit chaotic around then,
Yeah.
right? Especially Afghanistan. What was going through your mind? You're going in there as a police officer, you're ramping up. How did you feel?
So there was initial feeling of excitement, wanting to help,
Yeah.
that sort of thing. And I think it's a little known story, I think, in Canadian history, that there was almost 300 Canadian police officers that served voluntarily in Afghanistan over the course of the Afghan mission. And when we arrived there in the end of May 2011, it was just before Prime Minister Harper announced the end of the combat mission.
Okay.
So once that was done in July of that year, we had a number of policing resources that were embedded in the provincial reconstruction team down in Kandahar, and all of those policing resources came north to Kabul. So then our mandate then under the Canadian policing arrangement was we would train the Afghan National Police in leadership and management skills, specialized policing, anti-corruption investigations, that sort of thing,
Right.
community policing, and Ministry of Interior reform. So that was our focus. So we had people embedded in different areas working with the Afghan National Police. And showing them things that worked for us, because the challenge of being in that environment, well, there was a multitude of challenges, aside from the extreme violence and all that sort of thing, but illiteracy, corruption, the differences between the different ethnic groups, the tribal affiliations, all of those sorts of things. It was a very, very challenging environment to work in, and aside from just trying to build the skill sets and the capacity of the Afghan National Police, you were doing that in an environment where you were constantly switched on, like your head's on a swivel every time you go outside the compound. You're always looking and to make sure that you're safe as best you can. But yeah, it was an extremely challenging environment to work in, but we did some pretty good things there.
Right.
In my view, we did some pretty good things. I'm sure there would be people that would, think it was a complete waste of time given the recent events that have happened there.
Yeah.
But, for that 20-year period that, NATO and the UN were in there in Afghanistan, that provided a security envelope or protective envelope for women, young girls.
Right.
To go to school, to work outside the home, to be a significant part of society, to make a contribution. So all of those things were in place.
Mm-hmm.
So when I look at what happened recently in Afghanistan, I kind of hang my hat on. We did the best we could while we were there.
Yeah.
I think we did make a difference, albeit small, because measuring progress, here in Newfoundland versus in a place like Afghanistan, you're moving the yardsticks very small distances in Afghanistan, and if you move them ahead,
Right.
A few inches today, it was a good day,
Right.
right? So that's how we kind of gauged it. That's how we worked 7 days a week
Yeah.
for 12 months. So, but as hard as it was probably one of the most rewarding things I've ever done in my policing career.
Is your mom's not still alive, is she?
No, my mom.
Was she alive while you were over there?
Yes.
And there's a reason I'm asking that. My brother served over there, and I know how hard it was on my mom. Just tell us a little bit about how your mom was feeling.
If she was worried about getting rocks thrown at you in northern New Brunswick.
Rocks to rockets.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, here you are now over there. Right?
How did she handle that?
So it was a strain on her, and that's one of the things that I'm a little bit regretful for that, because she had suffered from Parkinson's disease, which eventually took her in January of 2014. But I remember talking to my mom, and I said to her before I left, I said, look, don't watch the news, which is
exactly
right, which is like saying, don't think of a pink elephant, right? Like that's exactly what you're going to do. So she was quite worried, and I certainly understand that as a parent today. If one of my daughters was in a place like that, of course you'd be concerned about it. But I reassured her that we were trained, we didn't take unnecessary risks, and our mandate was very different than from the military role, because the military, a lot of people throughout the course of the Afghan conflict, the news every single day was talking about what the military were doing. Right. And listen, I have so many friends in the military. They deserve every accolade and every kudo that comes their way. They did some hard yards when we were there, and lost a lot of people. And our role in that was those were the folks that provided the security envelope to allow us to go and help try to build the capacity of the Afghan National Police at the time.
I mean, you were training these folks in some pretty complex things. I mean, police work and all the things that you described, that's pretty complex in our society. Yeah. When things are safe and secure around you, it must have been incredibly complex to try to train folks in that. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so the training piece of it was, there was a number of things which made it a little bit complicated, and one was that there was different entities that were set up. So you had NATO Training Mission Afghanistan, which primarily was run by the American military. Then you had the European Police Mission, which was run by UPOL. Right. So the UPOL training was more geared towards civilian type training.
Okay.
The NTMA, or the NATO Training Mission Afghanistan, it was overseen by military personnel, and it was more militarized. Okay. So there's been numerous papers and books and stuff that have been written. There's one I read a long time ago, and I was actually looking at it before coming here. It's called The Police in War, and it's written by David Bailey and Robert Perito. And they looked at actions in places like Iraq and Afghanistan, Somalia, Panama, and how challenging it was for military personnel to go into places like that. And once the security envelope had been established, then expect them to do civilian policing, rule of law stuff when they're not trained to do that. No more than I'd be able to go out and navigate one of these frigates in the harbor here, right? So that was challenging, and what made it, and I could see the frustration on some of my military colleagues' faces in that, they've been given their marching orders, right? And an order is an order, and they're going to do their best to carry it out, in a responsible, ethical, moral way. Right. Some of that stuff was very challenging for them, and our challenge in that military environment was to have a person who would be kind of whispering into the ear of the ISAF commander from a policing perspective.
Right. Yeah.
Don't always be looking at it through the lens of the military.
Exactly.
Look at it through the lens of civilian policing, because interestingly enough, when I worked at the Canadian Embassy, there was a gentleman who was working with stability ops for ISAF Joint Command. It was a civilian guy. His name was Michael Dumont. And he did the rounds of all of the embassies.
Right.
And he wanted to know, what are you guys doing? So he came and sat with us, and we told him, here's what we're doing, and this, that, and the other thing. And he told us an interesting story about him and a 3-star U.S. general, Scaparrotti is his last name. And they went to Russia, and they sat with the last general who brought the troops out of Afghanistan in '89.
Okay.
To get his opinion,
Really?
right? To get his
Great
views,
story, yeah.
to get his views on, here's what we're doing. What do you think?
Right.
And his words to them were, according to Michael, were, if you do not have a functioning police force when you leave, it will be all for naught.
Right.
So you look at what's happening now.
Yeah,
Right,
yeah.
That's the case.
That's exactly the case. The rule of law is so important for a society to function.
Right.
Because in the absence of that, you have complete anarchy and
Yeah.
tyranny like we're seeing right now.
100%. It's amazing. I mean, there's no doubt about it. You guys made impact over there. It must have been something to see. I mean, the Canadian police that arrived, they must represent the gold standard in policing. For those guys that want in and want help, all volunteers, as you so rightly point out. Tell me about some of those fellas that you serve with, some men and women in the police force. Tell me about some of those
so we had people think it was just an RCMP thing. So the RCMP administer the program nationally.
Yeah.
But we had police officers from Halifax, we had them from the OPP, Montreal, Toronto, Winnipeg, Saskatoon, Calgary, Vancouver.
Just put up their hands one
Right, yeah, North Bay, we had Thunder Bay, we had people from across the country. And it was nice to get, like policing in a rural community versus policing in a place like Toronto are completely different. So all of these different skill sets all come together to form this critical mass. So it was nice that you could bounce all different ideas off people. But we had some, one guy, Staff Sergeant Steve Sadler, and Steve is retired now, a guy in Toronto. Amazing guy, one of the funniest guys I've ever met, and he used to write these missives he was up in Badakhshan province, up in Faizabad, right up in the north. They actually border on China.
Right.
And so Steve would write these funny stories that would come out of the north, right? and talking about, you can't make this up, right?
Yeah,
and
right.
That kind of genre of writing. And they were able to set up community policing programs up there, right? We had another lady, a
But
sergeant.
those skills aren't lost, right? So
Oh,
you
no.
went in, you taught the folks this stuff, and notwithstanding what we see on the news and all that, there are still people out there that are trained, that understand
Absolutely.
the way things should be. Those skills are not lost. Might be complicated for them, and that might be an understatement at the moment, but those skills are still there. You embedded those skills in those people, so it's just a matter of reigniting them when they're safe again.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Oh no problem. It's just but you're right. Our hope is that we've planted the seeds.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
and the problem for a lot of those people who want to make a difference is the systemic corruption, and the threats that they're living under. It's not only the threat to them; it's the threat to their family and their extended family into the village.
Are they bullies running the place? Would you classify them as bullies?
Oh, I probably couldn't say, this is a family show, right?
Yeah.
So what I want to say,
we're not picked up by HBO, so we gotta.
but bully is an understatement. Like what we're seeing now with the Taliban is it's frightening, and there's a lot of people in Afghanistan who are frightened to death because of their arcane medieval ways. And to see how they treat women, shutting down schools, maternal health, and all of these sorts of things that are going to suffer under a Taliban regime. I mean, when you name a guy like Sirajuddin Haqqani as your Minister of the Interior, that guy and his father were roaming the countryside, blowing stuff up when I was there.
Right.
Like, these guys are like, I mean, the worst of the worst.
Right.
And now they're running the place.
Yeah.
So, to think that, we're going to see a kinder, gentler Taliban is, we're dreaming in Technicolor, right? I mean, that is simply not going to happen. And in my humble opinion, I think that Afghanistan will once again become a haven for terrorists. I think that, there's so many external factors, like the geopolitical situation in that part of the world. I mean, you have Pakistan on one side that's primarily Sunni Muslim, then you have Iran on the other side that are Shias, and then it was like when Brother Rice played against Gonzaga, right? Like, you got Brother Rice over here, Gonzaga over here, and then we're all going to meet at Wishingwell Park, right?
And they're going
to play a game, and then we're all going to go home again, right? So that's kind of the best analogy I can think of is like,
Bill, they might need you down in the UN there to explain the Brother Rice Gonzaga. We might I've never heard Afghanistan described in the Brother Rice Gonzaga.
I think that's the first time I've said it. So.
But I do take your point.
Yeah.
I do take your point. Bill, you wrote a book about it. Tell me about that.
So after spending 12 months in Afghanistan, I came home in early June of 2012. And you can't go to a place and not be affected by it. And some good, some bad. But I was surprised at how few Canadians actually knew about the policing mission in Afghanistan. So, like most people who go on, peacekeeping missions, people normally keep a journal and, things that happen and that just for posterity, right? You want to capture these events in some way so, when you have your grandchildren bouncing on your knee, you can, say, back in the day, here's what grandpa did or grandma did and that sort of thing. So, I had taken copious amounts of notes and journaled and all that sort of thing. So I thought when I got back and seeing that there was this ignorance, I guess, as to what the Canadian policing mission was all about, I decided, you know what, I'm going to put pen to paper here and see what happens. And I was fortunate enough that a local publishing company here, Flanker Press, when I approached them and I pitched the story, and the Cranfords that run the business and own the business, they were excited about it and said, you know what, Bill, yeah, we'd like to be a part of that. So the book came out in August of 2018, and it was one more book than I thought I'd ever write.
Right.
One that didn't require crayons, right? Anyway, so I going through that entire process was a bit, cathartic in a way, because you write about things, you look at, say, okay, what do we do right, what do we do wrong, what are some of our successes, some funny stories. I'll tell you one funny story. So every Friday, of course, so Friday is a day of prayer, right? So it was kind of a day off for, a lot of people. So we used to go out and play, the most Canadian thing you can do is go out and have a game of ball hockey, right? Yeah. So we used to go out on 15th Street in front. So there's guards at either end that are, watching constantly. And we're out playing ball hockey on 15th Street out by the Canadian Embassy, and there's a UN compound.
Because if somebody calls car at that point,
it's usually like tank, right?
A whole different thing. Yeah. But go ahead.
So we're playing, and I remember I took a slap shot, and one of the ANP guys who was walking by, I hit him right in the cheek at the rear end.
ANP, what's that?
Afghan National Police.
Oh, okay.
So anyway, he's walking. I missed the net.
What kind of ball are you using?
One of the orange ones, right? So you know how those sting, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, I hit him right in the cheek of the ass. So anyway, he stopped. And he turned around and he looked at me and he scowled, and I said, the first time I ever thought I'd get killed playing ball hockey, right? but anyway, he was good about it.
Christ, it wasn't frozen.
Oh, I know.
I'd be playing with a jelly ball, if that was me.
But even in in times like that, we had to do things like that, and to kind of have some semblance of normalcy. And you think back, like you're out there playing ball hockey. And it could be on the streets of Mount Pearl or the streets of St. John, and you think about your buddies and all that kind of stuff. A bit of fun, but that was the kind of thing.
So the name of the book?
It's called Cops in Kabul, Newfoundland Peacekeeper in Afghanistan.
Right.
And I was able to with the book. I didn't write it to get rich,
right.
and nor will I get rich.
Yeah.
but I wrote it to have it on the historical record.
100%.
And I've tried to encourage a lot of my colleagues who served in Afghanistan and any other peacekeeping missions, like, start putting pen to paper. There's a gap in history there.
Yeah.
And the experience that our police officers had in Kandahar, embedded in the provincial reconstruction team, out doing presence patrols in a very dangerous part of the country, was very different than the experiences that we had post-combat role. So, you know, I think I've convinced a couple of guys to start doing that. But I think it's important, you know, from a Canadian historical perspective. And the goal in writing the book is to give people some insight as to what we were trying to do there, and talk a little bit about Afghanistan, because people, you know, watching the news, and, you know, Afghanistan is so far away. You know, how does that really matter, and that sort of thing, and just to let people know that there are a lot of very good, hard-working people in Afghanistan, and they are tired. They're tired of the wars. They're tired of the conflict.
I can only imagine.
And, you know, another story I can tell you about when I was there is one of the drivers at the embassy, a guy by the name of, I'll use another name for him given he could still be there, Hamid. So Hamid, you know, young guy, 30-ish, you know, family, small kids. We were driving one day, and I said to him, Hamid, I said, what do you think of all this? Like, this after getting to know him 2 or 3 months in. I said, what do you think about all this, us being here and stuff? And he thought for a minute, and he said, you know what? We know you're here to help us, and we really appreciate that. But he said, all I want, he said, I want to work. I want to provide for my family. I want my kids to go to school and get an education, and I want to live in peace. And I thought to myself, you're absolutely no different than any father elsewhere in the world. No different. We're more connected than we would like to think. You know?
100%. You're absolutely right.
Wow. I'm just blown away by the thoughts of what you've shared with us here.
What happened after Afghanistan? Where did your policing career take you then? And your journey?
So after Afghanistan, I was working in RCMP headquarters in Ottawa, and I was working in. I was actually responsible for the Marine and Ports program at the time. So got to learn a little bit about ships and you know, all of that sort of stuff.
Like a good Newfoundlander.
Like a good Newfoundlander. Although I'm terrible at sea. I mean, there's not enough gravel in the world that you can give me to do what you guys are going to do here shortly and go out onto Toronto. So I worked in Ottawa for a little while, and then family circumstances kind of took over. My mom was ill. I ended up moving back to Newfoundland. So the last year and a half of my service, I kind of came full circle, and in that I was, you know, I started here, you know, moved around a little bit, and then ultimately ended up back here, and I ran the Combined Forces Special Enforcement Unit, the CFSU that they had here. I think it's now since closed down, but it was half RNC, half RCMP, and our mandate was combating organized crime and internet child exploitation in the province of Newfoundland and Labrador. So that was the last job I had, and then, you know, they say, you know, when your time arrives. So I had 26 years in at the time. I always knew I wouldn't stay the full 35 because there was too many other things I wanted to do in life. So I decided, you know what, I'll end on a high note. I'm happy, you know, I'm healthy. I want to move on and do other things. So I started working with a risk management company based out of the U.S. As a matter of fact, it was a company run by Paul Kenny, your former teammate. And so I worked with them for a little while.
How you doing, Paul? Hopefully you'll watch this.
Oh, I'll send it to him. I'll send it to him for sure. But so I worked there for a little while, and then I got a contract to work with the United Nations Office of Drugs and Crime, doing contract work in Africa. So I was primarily in Namibia helping with wildlife crime, so poaching of elephants, rhinos, all that kind of stuff. But I was helping the police and their prosecutors to help mount financial investigations, because that's where I spent a lot of my time in the RCMP, is doing anti-money laundering, that sort of thing. So I ended up on a contract for a couple of years. Got to travel Africa, you know, Madagascar, Botswana, South Africa, Namibia, a bunch of different places. Really enjoyed it. Met some great people. And then while I was working there, I was home and I had a coffee with a friend, and he asked me, "So what are you up to these days?"
Yeah.
And I told him, and he said, "Well, you know, I got this friend that runs this company called Verifin."
Right.
So he said, "You should talk to him." So, sure, I'm always open to a conversation, and so I had a conversation with the CEO of Verifin and a couple of their senior people, and no expectations. We just had a conversation, and you know, I went back to Africa latter part of that week, and 2 weeks later I get an email with a job offer. So I've been with Verifin for the last 3.5 years. Been a great company to work for. Treat their people extremely well. It's been a joy to work there, and it's so different from the environments that I've worked in before.
Right.
You know, that whole creative spirit, that whole, you know, it's not about, you know, time in the office. It's about you know, work product, right? A results-oriented work environment, and it's served the company extremely well. As you know, it was bought out by NASDAQ a few months ago. So, you know, it goes to show that here in little old Newfoundland, we're quite capable of operating on a world scale. Yeah. Right?
Listen, I've heard nothing but good things about Verifin. All I ever hear is good things about Verifin. People love working there. They love what they're doing, and they seem to have a way to attract top talent as well. You being one of those guys, you must add a lot to the conversation at Verifin, because folks that I've met at Verifin, young people being involved in different things, you've had quite a career. You must add quite a layer of complexity to the conversations at Verifin, places that you've been. You think that they learn from your experiences as well?
Well, I hope so. You know, like my contribution there is, you know, I look at. So their products and services are cloud-based analytics to detect money laundering and fraud and financial crime and crime in general with a financial nexus. So, you know, I'm not coming at it from a technical standpoint. I'm not the guy who's writing the algorithms and writing the software to make this machine run. I'm looking at it from an investigative perspective, and I think, you know, being able to contribute that and give the people the why.
Yeah. So like a psychology of why people may be doing these things?
Well, you know, I'm certainly not a psychologist, but, you know, I provide the context in that, like, the type of information and analytics that we can provide to financial intelligence units, that is extremely useful for law enforcement, the pointy end of the stick that can go out and catch the bad guys. Right. So, you know, I've often said, you know, during meetings and that I only wish when I was in law enforcement we had the analytical horsepower that Verifin provides to be able to do this type of work, because it's absolutely amazing, some of the stuff you know, the systems do, and you know, and I guess that's what NASDAQ saw in the company, to be able to say, like, this is a world leader in this field. We want them as a part of our family, and it's been great.
And that's fantastic. And my question is equally about when I was a young guy in the Navy, and you know, chief would walk in, a guy had been in the organization for 25, 30 years. We'd always say, "Hey, chief, tell us we call them dits in the Navy. Tell us a dit, tell us a story." And we'd close our books, and he'd tell us these great stories, and it would provide context into the world that we were going into. It would just give us, it would be light, and we'd get to know the person. Do they do that at Verifin with you? They must say, "Bill, tell us a story."
Well, you know, I think you know, everybody likes a good police story, right? You know, like, and so I do share some, you know, things that happened, you know, when I was working in that area, and I'm a good friend of mine, Mike Cabana, who retired as a deputy commissioner from the RCMP a number of years ago. Mike spent a lot of time in anti-money laundering. And Mike used to joke, he said, "There's nothing sweeter than the sound of a tow truck backing up to take a drug trafficker's car or his boat or whatever," right? And that's the kind of things that I share with them, saying, look, what you do makes a difference. Don't just think that you're sitting there and you're just banging away at the keyboard and it has no relevance. Nothing could be further from the truth. So, you know, there's a lot of very, very talented, very motivated, brilliant people that are working in that company, and I'm in awe. Like I learned just as much, if not more, from those folks than I could ever pass on to them. I mean, you know, our experiences are very different.
100%.
And one of the things that we're most proud of down there is that, you know, there's. I was talking to our head of HR, one of our HR folks. You know, this is probably, you know, pre-COVID, and we were talking about, you know, getting personnel and that, and how we've had a number of folks, international students and that, who have ended up staying in Newfoundland after doing their degrees at Memorial or whatever, and becoming employees at Verfin. And at last count, there was like 46 or 47 different nations represented within the company. So that's, you know, it's when you walk around the hallways down there, it's like walking through the UN, right? I mean, it's just, and you think about how the perspectives that you get, the diverse perspectives and the culture that brings to an organization. And it's amazing.
That's a whole different spin, right, on Verfin. I mean, what they're adding to the complexity of our society, right, by bringing those folks here. And it says something about Newfoundland, too. It's not only the work, right, it's the people around here that embrace newcomers and stuff like that. It's a wonderful story.
Well, just change topic a little bit. I'm going to do the quintessential Newfoundland thing now. One of my other best friends growing up, Paul Joy, spent 30 years in the force, spent a lot of time up in the Northwest Territories. Two of his twin brothers, Mark and Chris, are also serving now. So Paul's retired from the RCMP, lives in Prince Albert, and the two boys are there. Does the Joy name mean anything to you? Have you met those guys in your travels?
No, the only Joy I remember from back in my youth is Stephen Joy and Andy, his dad, right, who coached hockey. But there's the one thing I've noticed about the military and the RCMP is, you know, for such a small province, we have a significant representation in those organizations. As a matter of fact, I'll just to bring you back to Afghanistan for a second. So when we were there, I remember going over to Camp Phoenix, and there was a change of the command. The battalion commander, the colonel, and the RSM were switching out, rotating out, and two new guys were coming in. So the RSM, burly guy, real nice fella. Anyway, so I was the deputy commander of the policing contingent, and my boss was with me. So we go over, of course, to meet the new guys. And so we're shaking hands, and I said, you know, hi, Bill Malone, and he shakes my hand. And he says, hi, my name is Ambrose Penton, and I knew. I said, okay, what part of the Rock are you from?
Central.
And no, he said it's some little place you wouldn't know it. And I said, well, try me. He said, Pooch Cove. And I said, I know Pooch Cove. I said, as a matter of fact, I said, my uncle is from Pooch Cove. I said, John Sullivan. He said, I know your uncle.
There you go.
Right. So that'll tell you, even on the streets of Kabul, you know, the connections and how small the world actually is.
Well,
it's astounding.
Funny. I think I'm going to tell you this story. We're sailing in on these little yags. This is 1985, 6, I don't know, into Antigonish, Washington. I'm the officer cadet who has to take the garbage off. Really important job, right? Buddy comes up on the dock. Any newfs on board? I swear to God, here we are in Antigonish, Washington. This guy says that, but anyway. So you're right.
So great journey, man. What's on the horizon for you? Like, what are you going to be up to next?
You know what? That's a great question, Alan. I'm a lot more contemplative now. I think, and that comes as you get older, right? And I had a little bit of a health scare a little while ago, and it kind of puts things in perspective about, you know, what's important in life and those sorts of things. So, you know, I'll continue to make a contribution as best I can with Verfin. You know, I really enjoyed the process of writing. You know, I don't know that I'm that good at it, but you know, I may, you know, turn a hand at doing that again, because I think there's lots of stories that are out there that can be told. So, you know, for now, I mean, that's kind of where I'm looking, and I hope that it's I'll have an opportunity to continue doing what I'm doing until I decide it's time to
hang up the skates.
Hang up the skates,
right?
Yeah, hang up the skates.
Bill, we always ask our guests to leave the audience with a small takeaway. Now, you're a guy who's had a pretty interesting journey, right? What would that small piece of advice be to somebody that might be watching?
You know what? I said it earlier about, as we watch television and we see all the things going on around the world and that sort of thing, don't lose sight of how connected we truly are to one another around the world, right? And, we only got one planet, right? And we're all a part of it. And I think just being kind and good to each other, for me, that's what's important, because, if we're able to sit down and have civil discourse about issues, I was always taught to be hard on the issue, not hard on the person, right? Yeah. And I think if we kind of take that approach and be kinder to people, I think we'll be a lot better served.
100%. Jerry, your thoughts?
Well, many of our guests tell us to live in the moment. Well, I can tell everybody that right now, Signal Hill, I can almost see right there. Yeah. Cape Spear is right there. St. John's Harbor is there. Right. And Bill Malone is right here. And I tell you that it's an inspiration to be sitting with you. Thank you.
Thank you guys. I appreciate it.
Well, another wonderful edition of Gale Force Winds. What an absolute pleasure to be in conversation with Bill Malone and hear about his journey and the impact that he has made and continues to make globally, like truly globally. From 15th Street in Kabul, playing street hockey, into Africa, now helping out one of Canada's leading financial fraud investigation companies, Verifin. I mean, this is true impact you're making, and we really appreciate it. And the fact you're here from Newfoundland, that's pretty impressive. I mean, I got to tell you, it's a real honor to be in conversation with you. I bet those Mounties that were going in and out of your house trying to encourage you to join must be pretty proud of themselves right now, if they're alive. And I'm sure if they're watching this, they'll think back, say, maybe I was one of those guys that encouraged them to join. We're sure glad that you joined the force to serve our country not only in Canada but also overseas. I always leave the audience with my own piece of advice, Bill, and quite frankly, the world needs more Bill Malone. So thanks for joining Gale Force Winds.
Thank you very much, Alan. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you for tuning in to Gale Force Winds. That's Gale Force Winds, WINS.com.